Hello everyone. I hope that no matter what is going on in your experience at this moment, that there is hope and inspiration remaining in the alleyways of your mind. As we navigate the lifting of the COVID-19 restrictions in our economic lives, I wanted to share some considerations with you. In our downtime, many of us have been thinking of how and what we can do to rebuild and repair our economic lives, right? Many of the things that we have been contemplating may now present themselves as opportunities. And to allow for the best possible outcome of these opportunities, there are certain considerations we will need to incorporate as we embrace these opportunities. So let's understand a basic but many times major mistake that not fully understanding or expressing whether a business venture is a loan or an investment can be a problem. The significant difference, of course, is that a loan is given with an expectation that you will be paid back, right? However, an investment, on the other hand, is a situation where you may or may not be paid back. So we need to look at that a little carefully. And in this segment, I want for us to focus on business investments. And I want to remind you of a few preliminary considerations that should be a part of any business venture, no matter how small or large. First, let's define some simple but important business terms. We need to understand the meaning of gross income, expenses, and net income. And I've written that on a board here for you. So we need to understand gross income, expenses, and net income. And although they are simply defined, many times they can be very tricky in addressing them. So let's start with gross income, right? We want to make sure, if it is our intention, that gross income is equal to all of the sales that comes into that venture. And if it isn't, then we need to make sure that we define what it isn't. Sometimes that gets lost. Number two, expenses. This, again, can be very tricky. It seems simple, but it can be very tricky, and it should be clearly and specifically defined. Questions like, are salaries a part of this? Right? How much? Whose salaries may be a part of it? Are financing repayments going to be a part of expenses? How much? What type? Right? And so forth and so on. This is where the business losses can be such that if you are investing, you do not receive any returns on your investment. So it needs to be clearly and fairly defined right up front. And then, of course, we have net income, right? And the net income is the balance after the gross and the expenses. So the gross minus the subtracting the expenses will equal your net. And many times, the return on your investment is usually defined as a percentage of the gross figure. So that's why it's very important. So now you see why it is so very important to clearly define these otherwise seemingly simple terms. If the net income is zero or less, negative, right? Then you are not likely to receive any return on your investment. Secondly, and also very important, let's define and ensure we are dealing with whom we think we're dealing with, right? Number one, if we're dealing with any type of entity, a corporation, an LLC, a PLC, whatever the vegetable soup is, we need to know who the individuals are behind those entities. So we need to know the individual owners, right? Who they are or who they may be. So remember that an entity is considered a fictitious person, and the ownership of the interest in that entity are made up of persons. Even when there is another entity that may have ownership, there are people behind that. So we need to know who those people are. We need to identify them. Third, after knowing the individuals who are actively involved in the ownership, who are actually, I should say, involved in the ownership of the entity, then we need to make sure, even if it's just us and another person, we want to ensure that there's some kind of succession planning in this thing, right? Because what can happen is if one or more persons are removed from the initial group of people, you may end up dealing with folks whom you probably would not have engaged with had they been presented at the onset of this transaction, right? So we need to know that. The other thing is that you want to make sure that you know who the key persons in the business will be. Who are the key people? The key persons are those people who are essential and considered key to the success of the business. So these are very basic elements of a business venture, but are usually a part of the most important underlying considerations when entering into any business venture, no matter how small or large. I hope this is helpful. Now let's go ahead and transform our dreams into our reality. I do have to say, however, please, this blog, this video is not intended to be legal or financial advice. We all know that it is always advisable that we discuss any particulars of any business venture with our legal or financial advisor before entering into any transaction, and definitely before finalizing any agreement. All right, so until next time, I hope this is helpful, and until next time, be well.